Welcome to you all. Welcome to this webinar. And thanks everyone for having accepted to take part in this online event. For those of you who are connected, we are going to give you instructions on how to select your language. As you can see, the webinar is in French, but we have simultaneous interpretation for English and French. And you have the possibility of selecting your language. Down your screen on your right, click on the globe and click on the language of your choice. Allow me to thank you not only for having registered for this event, but also for having submitted your questions or your concerns that should be addressed during this workshop according to you. As for housekeeping rules, this webinar is an hour and a half webinar. Your microphones are muted, but you still have the possibility of asking questions by using Q&A box. It's also possible for you to make comments in the chat box, which is aside the Q&A box. The webinar will be recorded. And for panelists and speakers, please speak at a low pace in order to allow the interpreters to follow thoroughly what you are saying and help with accurate interpretation. I would also like to invite you to introduce yourselves in the chat box. Give us your name, your organization, and where you come from in order for us to know who is here with us and from where you are joining us. Next slide, please. So this is a reminder for those who have just joined. It's about interpretation. You can select either English or French, depending on your language. But the event will be mostly in French. So if you're an English speaker, stay tuned on the English channel. So we have speakers and facilitators with us. We will have a welcoming remark from Dr. Sintike Ugbe, who is the Director of Humanitarian and Social Affairs of ECOWAS Commission, based in Abuja, Nigeria. We will also have a presentation from our colleague Celine. Celine is our advisor, technical advisor and focal point responsible for social protection. This will be followed by Corina's presentation. Corina is an independent consultant and she has accepted to contribute to this important event. Corina has more than 20 years of experience in the humanitarian area, and she works mostly on funding and humanitarian policies. She was team lead for Oxfam Policy Management and a lead on a study of the World Bank on the linkages between cash transfer and social protection in the Sahel. She also co-wrote a study on the use of social media based on vulnerability in the region. So she's part of a team working with the World Bank on social protection and on policies in the Sahel region. We also have Amadou Diop, one of our colleagues, technical advisor in charge of financial issues, and he will facilitate the discussion panel. He is responsible for financial inclusion. And on the next slide, we will see the panelists who will take part in the discussions. We have Christian. Christian Bodwig is the person in charge of social protection and employment for West and Central Africa at the World Bank. Prior to that, he was a senior economist and program officer for Southern Europe for World Bank. He also was the head of program for inclusive growth of the European Union. He worked at the Asian Department, East and Pacific Asia Department, where he led the program of the World Bank in Vietnam. He started his career at the World Bank working on operational program projects in education and social protection in Eastern Europe. And he was based in Washington then. And he works also in Sarajevo and Sofia. In the panel discussion, we also have Sigrid, who is thematic expert on social media, social safety nets and cash transfers in sub-Saharan Africa at ECO-DG in Nairobi, Kenya. She worked as humanitarian actor for more than 20 years for various organizations, and she has experience in crisis situations, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa. During her recent years, she specialized in the linkages between humanitarian intervention and social protection system, focusing on uh, particular contexts and conflictual contexts as well. As panelists, as you can see on the slide, we have Paul Quanles van Offord, who is the regional advisor, social policy at UNICEF at the Regional Office for West and Central Africa, and he supervises the social policies of UNICEF in the region in the area of social protection, child poverty, public funding management, and social governance. Before that, he worked as an expert in Tanzania, Zambia, Vietnam, and Senegal. So to conclude with the panel discussion, we have Saba, who is the advisor of the Global Program of Cash Transfers of Relief International since 2018. She has 15 years of experience in the humanitarian sector, especially in cash transfer and also in a hybrid approach with social protection. She occupied various positions in the area of coordination as consortium officer and the working group on cash transfers. She is experienced working in the Sahel region as a person in charge of interagency coordination on social safety nets and also close collaboration with organizations on various tools like the harmonized framework. Saba worked also in the Middle East on food security issues and working group on cash transfers before holding various positions in Turkey and before joining Relief International, which is member of CCD, a group of international NGOs in improving quality delivery of cash transfers to people affected by humanitarian crisis. So, ladies and gentlemen, here are the various facilitators, speakers, and the panelists that we are going to have. Of course, the agenda will start with the opening remark of Dr. Sintike from the ECOWAS Commission before giving the floor to our colleague Celine for her introductory remarks. The second presentation will be the one of Corina, who is the independent consultant. And we will conclude with, before starting the panel discussions. Then my colleague Mirko will conduct the last part of our webinar. Celine? We are now going to give the floor to Dr. Sentike for her introductory remarks.
Thank you, Amadou, for that excellent opening session. On behalf of the ECOWAS Commission, I want to welcome you all international partners, organization, representatives on the region who are here with us online this afternoon. Permit me also to start by also recognizing Madame Céline Senitsky of the Global Learning Platform on Humanitarian Cash Assistance, and of course, Corina, who will also be speaking during this opening session, and also the distinguished panelists. Today, we're here to discuss two important issues that are critical for the ECOWAS region: social protection and humanitarian assistance, and of course, related to the development of our region. Why is social protection important for the West African region? Of course, you know that it is a fundamental human right. It is also a social and economic necessity. But we know that there are challenges within our region in addressing social protection, both in terms of coverage and also in terms of the spending as a percentage of our GDP to social protection. The second focus of this session is humanitarian assistance. As a region faced with multifaceted crisis, and of course, bring these two issues together. Often you find people dealing with social protection, talking to each other in different ministries, and those dealing with humanitarian crisis or emergency talking among themselves. But here we are today, bringing in these two important topics to see how we can build synergy and better enhance approach in dealing with them in our region. I'll quickly go to discuss with you what ECOWAS also is doing in terms of social protection. Social protection is very important to the ECOWAS Commission. And you may recall that in November 2023, the ECOWAS Commission developed and validated its ECOWAS Social Protection Framework and its operational plan. Now, why did ECOWAS Commission develop the Social Protection Framework? It is to give a broad set of guidelines and principles to ECOWAS and our member states in the design of protection interventions. The ECOWAS Social Protection Framework is driven by the principle that the provision of comprehensive and inclusive social protection will contribute to the improvement of the quality of life of the citizenry. We realize that in view of the fact that there are so many challenges with our region, a number of shocks, the cross-border socioeconomic challenges, there was a need to have a framework that will foster a high level of collaboration at the regional level to broaden existing social protection programs through a more coherent and effective approach. The Social Protection Framework reiterates the commitment of ensuring that 40% of the population is covered by social protection in 2050. Now, connecting social protection and humanitarian assistance is one of the key priorities of the ECOWAS Social Protection Framework. Permit me to refer to you to section 4.4 of the framework, which calls for a better understanding of the linkages between development, humanitarian, and the peace nexus. I also want to draw your attention that within the framework, there are very, very important and relevant discussions related to humanitarian assistance and social protection. And I want to highlight some of the key relevant points and recommendations. One of them has to do with coordination and building synergy between emergency and humanitarian interventions and social protection issues. The framework realizes that we cannot allow social protection to work in silos and the humanitarian intervention, but also to ensure that there is synergy between these two important sectors. The second point that the framework emphasizes is the need to establish early warning mechanisms that will allow the appropriate allocation of human resource and funding to address the needs of the vulnerable population. The third point I would like to also highlight, which is linked to the discussion today, is to ensure that we develop responses using existing social protection systems by adapting and revamping them to respond quickly to humanitarian and crisis needs. Again, what we are trying to emphasize is that there's no need to reinvent the wheel. When you have a comprehensive and socially inclusive database for social protection system, this can be adapted very, very quickly to ensure that we respond to humanitarian crisis. This meeting, therefore, I want to assure you, as this workshop, this webinar also aligns also to the priorities of the ECOWAS operational plan for the social protection of the West African region. I want to also use this opportunity to acknowledge the fact that one of the things that was discussed among the member states at the ministerial and expert level on the ECOWAS social protection framework is the need to promote better coordination of social protection within the stakeholders, either those dealing with development, those dealing with humanitarian emergencies or every other form of crisis, and those dealing with social protection. It reiterates that it recognizes that the government are the lead actors for development, and they often roll out social protection systems in various ministries. You can have social protection in Ministry of Women Affairs, in ministries of health, in ministries of youth empowerment. All these programs and policies, we need to build synergy with them. We need to enhance coordination with them. And therefore, the ECOWAS social protection framework recognizes coordination as one of its key guiding principles. We hope that today the panelists will try to draw from their experience to show us how we can further not only enhance coordination and synergy, but strengthen the link between humanitarian cash assistance and social protection. This includes coordination between humanitarian actors, how it can foster stronger coherence between humanitarian action and social protection intervention that addresses chronic vulnerabilities. We understand that we cannot have a one-size-fits-all approach, but I hope that during this panel discussion, you'll be able to share with us some of the best practices, some of the lessons learned, where you have ensured, where there has been effort, where there have been successful attempts to ensure synergy between humanitarian cash assistance, humanitarian action with social protection. As ECOWAS, while commending this regional webinar, we want to encourage that this kind of discussion be cascaded at the national level, because that is where the action is taking place. That is where you have the humanitarian actors, both in the government sectors and in the civil society. Those are where you have the national partners working at the national level. ECOWAS really recommends that this kind of dialogue also takes place at the national level, where humanitarian assistance is prominent, where, of course, we have seen the need for greater linkages between humanitarian protection system and the need to have it enhanced with development and emergency response. I look forward to, an excellent presentation from our panelists, and you can count on ECOWAS to continue to accompany you if you decide to cascade this kind of conversation at the national level to provide the platform for you to engage with our member states in this kind of important discussion. I thank you very much for listening. Merci beaucoup and obrigado.
Thank you very much, Dr. CTK. Thank you for highlighting intensively the objectives of social protection coverage, which is very ambitious at ECOWAS has, but also exhorting us on more coordination with a central role that the governments should play, or more coordination not only within the various ministries, but also with the various partners, be it in the development sector or in humanitarian sector. Of course, this is something we should try to give more details on during the presentation of the day. Very quickly, could you please share the presentation on the framework, like how to create that nexus between humanitarian transfers and social protection? Now, why should we create a link? The objective is to better meet the needs of the vulnerable populations in this repeated crisis context, which is presented and which is quite complicated in that region. And of course, multiplicity of crises, increase in humanitarian needs, which are present. We have some shocks which could be predictable, and some of them are recurrent and more prolonged. We also have humanitarian funding, which are on the short term, and other humanitarian funding, which are getting reduced at the global level with regards to the increase of the needs that we have at hand. So the challenges are huge in terms of cost effectiveness, uh, rapidness with early activities through the existing programs, but also on responses that represent the big work that we are doing. And she exhorted that for more coordination and for more link between social protection and cash transfers, but also taking into account better use of resources in order to reduce the needs. Next slide, please. We should not also forget that we should link up more social protection and cash transfer. And if we do so, we have a common goal, which is related to access to human rights, and we are trying to respond to this. We have all the principles of protection of these populations in order to better meet the needs that are there. We would like to address some problems who are here, and we want to have better coverage, better relevance, better adequation, exhaustiveness in terms of response, timely response that are effective, predictable, accountable, sustainable, and owned by the populations. Of course, we have many objectives that are similar to humanitarian objectives and social protection objectives. And thanks to that, we can say that we have people together, and the objective is to protect them and relieve them from their sufferings, promote and maintain human dignity, and meet their needs, strengthen and support their livelihoods, and also keep these people alive, of course. So we have things that are really similar when we look at the social protection aspect as well as the humanitarian aspect. However, there are some discrepancies despite those similarities. If you take all the humanitarian principles, which are humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence, it tends towards principles of social protection, including solidarity, which is a human right. And of course, we have universality because we would like to cover the maximum of person in the life cycle. We also have principles of equality and non-discrimination and impartiality. And of course, the diverging point, which could raise some questions, is related to the Sahelian context. This is related to independence versus putting the government at the center, which is something really central and on which we should focus on when we talk about social protection. Next slide, please. Actually, when we think about all this, we will say that it will be difficult to link up humanitarian activity and social protection. So we need to look at the continuum of the needs in terms of humanitarian action. There are preparations with anticipated actions. Then we have action shocks. We have to prepare all this. We need the phase between the emergency response and the first signs of early relief. And we will work on this before moving towards resilience. All this works with the social protection functions with prevention in order to avoid deprivation. We have protection, which is there so that once this occur, we should try to relieve the deprivation. We will also talk about promotion and also transformation in order to improve the income and respond to the concerns. On these functions, we have things that are very interlinked. If we look at this with social protection focus, we have pillars who are there, which are there. We have social protection, which is non-contributive. It means I'm not going to benefit. I'm going to benefit from the moment I contribute because we have the insurance. We have the non-contributive one as well, and that is taking part in based on the resources that one have and based on the needs. And the last pillar is policies of the job market. Of course, you have many governmental policies that will contribute to that social protection. On cash transfers and humanitarian response, we focus the more on non-contributing aspects. I mean, on social assistance, social safety nets. We call them, we give them various names in the region. That is why we have also cash transfers through the various social transfers, which could be there. Next slide, please. So it's relevant to create that link. As we said, we can use the existing systems to potentially help. We need to strengthen these existing systems, make them more strong, and or help to create or design them. And the objective is to make things move forward. We have linkages which are here, which helps a lot with that contribution. Next slide, please. So there is a continuum on all this. And of course, we can choose a la carte at which, how we are going to integrate. Like we don't want to create a parallel humanitarian system which exists. We can have various levels of interrogation or integration. So here we have alignment. Alignment, we should have like a common ground, but we should stop ignoring one another and we'll start working together. We can also join the existing systems. For example, a humanitarian response that could use elements of the existing systems or a part of the structure which could be taught. Or we can also think about expanding the system that we call top-up with vertical extension or horizontal extension. And we can talk more about integration. The next slide, please. Of course, we have limitations, and sometimes we don't need to create links, as we have seen in terms of mandate and principle. The first thing in general rules we should not do this is to avoid creating nuisance to the population. In some cases, if we are in conflict areas, we can decide not to create a link in order to avoid creating nuisance on the population. This will depend also on the type of shock which is handled. If we have a shock and we have to respond very quickly, then we will not have time to create links. We have to target some populations. Sometimes this is for migrant populations or refugees. We don't have necessarily an integration in the social protection system. This could be also related to leadership or guidance, and the government has a central role to play in the conflict. We should avoid creating links in that area in order to avoid creating additional problems. And of course, we'll have problem of preservability and of course, not creating link doesn't mean that we should ignore everything. We should be informed from what is happening here and there. We should see how strong the social protection system is and capitalize on that in order to respond. And we can also try, based on the programs that we have, think about systems that could be implemented in the future. As humanitarian actor, we have various tools available, tools of coordination, through which we are trying to exhort, making activities, providing technical assistance, on which we are going to talk about in details in the various presentations. Sorry, it was very fast.
To have everything linked to humanitarian assistance. And also we have a toolbox which is available. And that's the last slide, to which you can have access. Very mostly those tools are available in English, and you can use them and see how you can apply it to your context. I'm going to stop here. I have a great pleasure to give the floor to Corina, and she will be talking about the report and make the linkages between social protection and cash transfer. Thank you very much, Celine. Good afternoon to everyone. Effectively, I'm going to talk about the different outcomes of this report that I have reduced. It's something that we have worked on together with 3 other peoples. We have Sophie Batas, who was a consultant at that time, Karim Zaifant, director of policies, direct management in Europe, and then another person from the World Bank. The objective is to look very closely to the different questions that Celine has talked about, and identifying the different links, the points, the nexus, and to lead it towards a convergence. We have also looked at the different concerns, the different obstacles. We've noticed that in theory it's very simple to talk about it. Everyone agreed on the great principles. But as you know, the devil lies in the details. We're going to use the framework Celine has introduced, which is a work that we have conducted in 2019. And from every country that we studied And each programs, we've looked at 16 elements. You can look at the different elements that we have explored. We have it at 4 levels: the national policy, the different objectives of the programs, the conception, and also the implementation in details. As Celine has explained, the idea is to look at everything, and we have every options that we have to look at to apply it to the option. We have worked on 6 countries of the sub-region, and concerning humanitarian programs, we have different criteria that we have to use in different households. And it was at the lean period that we had to apply it in 2020, 2021. In Chad, it was focused on refugees, and also Burkina Faso and Mali. We've looked at the different support we provided to displaced people. In the region, we have found that we have different protection systems, and this is thanks to the investment of a World Bank and other donors from the SASPP. Since 2014, they are supporting countries to establish pillars. And despite all those investments, the system are not yet fully implemented as the objective presented. And also, in this late period, lean period, we had implemented it at a very large scale. Next slide. As Celine has mentioned it, the convergence is not an objective, and we have to mention it, but we had great regions in the region. We have strategic regions, we have needs which are recurrent, and the needs of the lean period is a very concerning issue. We have to look at all solutions to work effectively to reach a minimum level of coverage. Humanitarian and development programs should work together. We have also looked at the landscape in the region. I invite you to have a look at the report to understand the different colors that we have used in this report. You will notice that most of the programs, they worked in parallel. We have very few elements that we found which lead to a very supported alignment. We have a convergence which is not fully painted. And then we have found some issues where it wasn't in the same direction. In some issues, it was inverted. And we found elements which can also help in moving towards this convergence, but they are not fully implemented. We worked on different tools and how each one of the programs are using them, and which is the business case in this investment and how it should be done. Next slide. I'm going to introduce to you 2 chapters of the reports. The first one, which analyzes the different methods of work and the different factors which allows to move forward or which prevents it. And then after, we will talk about the different elements. If you look at the methods that we have used, we will see the different facilitators. And we have noticed that is human relations. The fact that people have collaborated together in the past, which allows this convergence, especially in Mauritania, in which we can find this attitude, the community is worked together with the program. We have also noticed what we can call pending facilitators. And it can be more exploited in different countries. For instance, the global policy of the World Food Program, which helps to work with social protections. And then we have the collaborative cash delivery network, which is also one of the participants of this webinar, to see how it can be applied in every part of the region where it is possible to allow this convergence. After that, we can also talk about other methods which goes in both ways. That can also prevent the objectives, and we're going to introduce to you some examples. And at the last point, we can talk about the hindrances. Policy and procedures of donors is very important for the convergence. We found a lot of examples where we have donors, they are not harnessing of this positive outcome of it. We have also found that in some areas, priorities are different, and it can be a hindrance. I think in the panel, the discussion will come back, and different donors can respond to it. Another slide. We have also another method that we have used, which goes in both ways. Dr. Sintike has also talked about it. The governmental leadership is very important to set the different goals. Like in Senegal and another country, we have a very clear support of the government. In other systems, like in Chad and Burkina Faso, different partners, humanitarian partners do not work together because it's very difficult, because the platform is not there to help them to work together. It's not well established. And then we have this institutional anchor, and the link, which will be the different responses to the different shocks, are prerequisite. In other countries in which we have governmental structures, in which we have gaps between them, this is an obstacle to overcome. Talking about the obstacles, one obstacle, which is very clear, is the political, the financial policy. And we have to know that all partners that are coming, they have their own objectives, but it is something that is not explored. Sometimes they are not openly stated, and that didn't help us in the discussions. There is also another obstacle, which is the difficulties we encountered in terms of harmonization. We have different systems, governmental systems that are there, and some other people think that is because it won't help them to have a full control. And all these aspects are very difficult. Let me talk about the different elements of the programs. We've looked at what is easier to align with, and the level of contestation is high. We have separated them in 3 different groups. In your left, at your left, you have elements which are easier to get used with. We have also in the middle other problems which can be explored and in which we can find solutions. And then I'm going to give you some elements on the different points. When it comes to less litigious, contagious one, it's very important, as you know, contracts are negotiated jointly. In other countries, we have noticed that different NGOs and civil societies organizations do not have a mapping, and this overlapping, it's something that we can exploit more and have a communication, a consolidated communication and harmonized communication. We have already talked about the targeting, and other elements is very important to mention them. We've seen that there is a room to maneuver, because when you look at the different registers, a social register in the region can be a point of connection. But as far as there is already this agreement, that can be a very key tool which can be used by humanitarian organizations. On the other hand, we have also a divergence on the methodology which is used and the process. Now, very quickly, I'm going to introduce to you a report in which I've worked also. We've worked together in Dakar, UNICEF, and the World Food Program. Is the use of social registries and based on vulnerability. And there also, we can also notice that the devil is in the details. We have to cover the geographical. We have to cover it geographically, and the displaced people ask the question if they are included or excluded, at which space. Do we know if these data are something that are updated very often or not? Next slide. And also, if we look at the different programs using the social register in the region, we have Senegal and Mauritania at the top, where we have a lot of users. And we have to notice also that in Senegal, it's compulsory. In Mauritania, it's on a voluntary base. Actually in Mauritania, they invite programs to use the register. We need a lot of data, and it doesn't make sense if it is not those data are not used. The use also can be a challenge. And here we have an example from Niger. It's true that there are a lot of efforts made to collect the data, but the efforts are not backed with the use of the data collected. Let me go back to the report of the World Bank. One element which is very difficult to harmonize and change is the cost. The cash transfer. They want actually to meet the needs at the basis is due to that they are given priority of the adequation of the support. The government, on the other hand, will put emphasis on the way of conducting it. And they have also to look at the sustainability of the budget in the long run. And here, as you can see, we have a question of divergence. But we have also to highlight that the harmonization of values doesn't mean that we have to arrange them. What is important is to have a dialogue on the way each part can establish their values and how to harmonize them and which can be harmonized under the same program. For instance, in Burkina Faso, on the lean period in 2022 has found 18 different values. And 1 year later, in 2023, they have reduced it to 8 different values. That is a progress, but it's still a challenge. In terms of conclusion and recommendations, the question is to know how are we going to translate this agreement in which we can have better results. And we recommend that, first of all, to be focused on the added value, the strategic added value, and the shared benefits, and how every country can use it, and use the limited resources. And it's something that donors should support and support very greatly. We have to face it. We need to compromise on some of the points, which requires an refrain. But when it comes to the targeting and the use of registers, we need to invest more in a sustainable system in the country. As we know, we didn't need to be discouraged. We have to understand them and we have to live with it. What is very important is to establish a common understanding. And my last slide will explain that. It's very important. We have conducted this study during the COVID-19 period, and how to gather people physically is very important. We have also to gather them technically and ideologically and try to understand how the other part functions. And it's very important if we can work in very mixed teams. We need also to share or to speak on one voice, to not be in a policy of divide to rule. We recommend that we should focus on rapid gains. And we have to be ready for a very long run. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I recommend you find this report online. I will invite you to type your questions, and I'm going to give the floor to Amadou to lead the discussions. Thank you very much, Corina. And thank you very much for setting the landscape and to see how we can work with social actors and development and work on this development. I'm going to go into the same vein with Dr. Cindy, Corina, and other participants have talked about the link between the different humanitarian actors and the protection, social protections. My question will be for Christian from the World Bank. I'm going to talk about the funding. As Corina has reminded, it is very important to invest on sustainable systems. I would like to know, system, what is the role of different donors, whether they are alone or together? What can they do to establish this platform and how to protect in the region? Thank you very much for the question. And thank you very much also to our gathering house. As you said, it's very important to have dialogues in some forums like this one. I will start with the role of donors. First of all, we have to be focused on a support. We can hear the speaker. The speaker is breaking. It's very important to come back on the analysis. We're not in a process of emergency. In a crisis, we have different elements which need to have a structural response. And we need to have a joint response on it. We can hear the speaker. As I said, we need a structural response, a diverse structural response, and more support of the state. The state shouldn't only be focused on some areas. That's why it's very important to have donors. It's very important to strengthen this support, systemic support, the implementation, a capacity of coordination of mobilizing the funds to help to have a rapid response. And it's very important to be very clear on this change of the context. We need a dialogue which is very clear, which is inclusive, and the role of different donors is, first of all, to finance, but also to contribute to this dialogue, not only in the community, but also with governments. We need to change the approach with which we are working and to have another reflection on the partnership. Is a role for the different donors in one direction. And as far as we are in a very complicated period, we can hear the speaker. The reports introduced by the speaker are giving us a lot of insights on them. Talking about inclusive dialogue, I would like to come out on the role of the government. I think the dialogue should be inclusive and we need civil society in the discussion.
Now we are going to give the floor to Saba, who represents the CCD, which is a coalition of NGO, which change, improvements, or adaptation would be necessary in order to facilitate a more inclusive or integrated and sustainable approach between humanitarian programs, the cash, and social protection. How do you see this as NGO? This is related to what have been said We are very happy to add on this with our perspectives. First of all, for us, what we see at first hand is to work in order to strengthen institutional coordination mechanisms, that is at the national level for countries, but also at the regional decentralized level, having the possibility of creating common intervention framework and coordination framework, as well as governance, all this to facilitate decision-making among various actors and within various institutions. We're also proposing to work through working groups and joint working groups in order to bring everyone together, share experience, in order to facilitate information sharing. For example, something that could be seen in the humanitarian architecture. We can also explore the possibility of encouraging planning, emergency planning processes. And here we are not talking about homogeneity, homogeneous things, but talking about coordination of intervention with the various objectives of uh, programs and institutions. We should work in order to be consistent and have an alignment and harmonization. And also regarding data sharing, we should create a framework and pay respect to data protection together in line with the country's objectives, what is the architecture, what are the needs, so that this could meet the needs that exist. We should work on common tools that should respond to the various data and in all types of programs. Secondly, and in line with what has been said, we would like to propose working on collectivities and integration of all the programs in order to guarantee a complementarity of the approaches. We are talking about creating nexuses between various cash transfer mechanisms and social protection. What we can have in the region is to have rapid response mechanisms, seasonal cash transfers, and also social safety nets that are more regular and predictable. We can also explore the possibility of having flexible modality programs in order to transfer, communicate, or building bridges and having flexibility of moving from one program to the other, and also work even beyond the cash link. There is a need for better coordination between various ministries to handle this. Of course, we are talking about management and disasters management. We are talking about social protection programs for education, health. We are talking about social services, etc. And finally, we would like to explore the possibility of involving the vision of the populations themselves, populations that we are helping, the implementation and assessment of programs, and of course design of the programs in order to assess all these ecosystem right from their perspectives and work in order to include their vision on the relevance and efficiency. And finally, like we've said, we need to work for dialogue and interconnectivity of the various sectors, which will strengthen capacities that could help in improving interconnectivity of the approaches, taking into account the point of view of each and everyone, because there are various cultural differences, which requires the creation of a dialogue to enhance collaboration. We should collaborate and also improve an integrated approach and monitoring of interventions in order to avoid that approaches are more uh, in silos. We should also set up knowledge sharing platforms in terms of innovation, challenges, impacts, cost effectiveness, things that are raised when you talk about integration between humanitarian sector, cash transfer, and social protection. We should also look at pathways for advocacy for political influence, but also work on more flexible approaches, mechanisms, funding mechanisms that are flexible. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sabah. As a takeaway, approaches in silos, developing common tools, setting up architecture of the response, work more on complementarity and continuity, on more regular transfers and more predictable transfers, and put those who are vulnerable in at the center. You've highlighted coordination aspect as a key one. And my question is for Paul and Sigrid, or maybe Christian could continue. In terms of coordination, which coordination mechanism do we have in the sub-region which could be conducive for discussions or exchange between technical and financial partners in support to the government, to the humanitarian community, in order to emerge a good coordination and support to people. And like Saba said, put the people at the center of the action. So, Paul, Sigrid, you can add on this issue of coordination or the coordination mechanism that could emerge. Thank you very much, Amadou, and good morning to you all. Thank you for allowing me to take part in this webinar. So, contribution, all this is based on the experience of UNICEF and WFP on our joint program of social protection we are implementing in the Sahel. As for the coordination issue, we talk most of the time about what we discuss, what we coordinate, but less about the real and comprehensive platforms that exist and which could give this dialogue opportunity or provide the dialogue opportunity. I think it's important to look at three levels of platform. First of all, the government and the coordination mechanism that exists, and also platforms that allow a dialogue between, on one hand, the government and the humanitarian partners, on the other hand. And the third level, we have coordination between partners supporting social protection and humanitarian actors. And all of these three levels will play at the central and decentralized level. Within the government, let's take the example of the Sahel. It's not always obvious to get the most appropriate mechanism within the government to develop dialogue between social protection system and humanitarian action with a cash component. We have even countries who don't have any coordination mechanism in this sector. So there we need an agenda to support the countries for the implementation of coordination mechanism for social protection sector so that the government could uh, exercise its leadership in the sector, initiate and participate in the dialogue. Discussions over the years were on adaptive social protection, and these links allowed to strengthen the reflection on what could be the actors that will take part in these platforms. My last comments on the coordination within the government, we are talking about the nexus, social protection and humanitarian action. And even in government, we have very important discussions to strengthen between actors implementing social protection actions and those implementing responses to emergencies in the government. And that level of coordination is also critical beyond discussions of on the humanitarian sector, partners and government. To conclude, let's start in a simple way on the various platforms I've highlighted. Let's start getting to know each other between government, humanitarian actors. Can we create formal platforms, but also informal spaces in order to allow the understanding of our perspectives, vision, and priorities, and simply exchange or share information? Because sometimes within the government, there is a lack of information on what is happening in the humanitarian sector and vice versa. We can strengthen that aspect. And finally, have a common analysis on the priorities that we should address and use as an entry gate in order to strengthen the links and move towards a common agenda on many years, which will allow us to stay committed or engaged in this dialogue. Over to you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Paul. So the issue of common analysis and the three levels of coordination that you've talked about are key within the government, between government and humanitarian actors, and between humanitarian actors and social protection systems. Sigrid, we can give you the floor so that we can continue this discussion, because it will be good to have the opinion of the European Union on this. Sigrid, you have the floor. Yes, as for the governments and what we have as achievements in this sub-region, notably in Sahel for more than 40 years, since the first food crisis and nutrition crisis of the year 60s and 80s, the international community has supported, be it with humanitarian and development, supported the implementation of national mechanisms for prevention and crisis management. This has various names in various countries, and this was expanded. These were expanded to coastal countries. We also have at the regional level a very strong unit, that is the SEALs. And what I'm saying is with regards to the more specific crises, droughts, crisis related to natural shocks. Now there is another type of shock which came to in the sub-region, complete displacement of population, violation of human rights, protection of populations. So there is a new dimension that we should address in a coordinated way. So then we've worked together on all this coordination cycle of the emergency response towards drought. Now, what do we do with regards to the conflict? And that planning, response planning cycle, monitoring of response regarding drought. Now we improvise because it's quite recent in the displaced people areas. Humanitarians, like Saba mentioned it, rapid response mechanisms where humanitarians have funds for like 3 months in order to cover all the needs in terms of foods, health, protection, clean water. So it's a complex package and it's very fast. Sorry. So it's a model of response to shocks, a tool that could serve as a model for social protection, which is reactive to the shock. Because what we are doing is for free and it's very rapid. Now, on this model, we need to bring stakeholders together for example, for the humanitarian actors, when there are alerts or warnings, we should validate the initial assessment, which response could be provided. Could the government handle this in some areas? In which capacity can we leave behind? We're obliged to work on contingency plans in some areas. So I think there is an operational coordination which could serve as a basis for governments at the local level, so that the governments at the local level could benefit from it and also coordinate. And in those areas, what are the needs? We have a calculation model. We know how long this lasts, and we know what this is all about. We've lost the signal with Sigrid. I think it's an important point. I had many ideas for the sub-region because we have various models in regarding coordination. But what do we do for populations affected by conflict? That is what is dear to our hearts currently. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sigrid. I think what you have shown us is that the problem is not new, because you said that it is 40 years now that we have these problems. It will be interesting to hear from Christian. Do you have another point to add on this coordination mechanism that exists already? No? Let's move with the next question. A question for Saba. We hear that there is a coordination mechanism. So, based on your opinion of civil society, what are the main shortcomings in the will of setting up the nexus between cash transfer and social protection, and how NGOs see how to overcome these issues? So we have some key points that we've taken note of. The first one is the fact that we take action in fragmented ecosystems where there is a lack of coordination, and there is also diversity of actors who are working in a very separated way. Uh, and I think we all have a consensus on the idea that it's important to set up interagency platforms for a regular dialogue, a joint planning, and why not, once again, a common governance framework. Data, data management, database management is very key and is a key point of discussion within various programs. And data sharing is quite limited between various agencies and the various components. And what we'll suggest as solution is to agree upon common standards in terms of data management, data protection, and also the implementation of a sharing mechanism that is efficient and sure between various stakeholders. There is another element which has an impact on the continuity of the actions, and that is the issue about political change and political instability, which affects even fundings that are available. So globally speaking, there is a continuity of the programs which is challenged, and also the delay in some funding which is linked to that. And the idea is to work towards strengthening the resilience of local actors in order to adapt to various changes. And finally, we have the limited resources issue. And as we know, there is a lack of availability of resources, and this has an incidence on the scaling up of the programs. And for us, we need to see how funds could be put together and work on a multi-donor approach, and also work on the possibility of having funds. Thank you, Sabah. We need to strengthen the resilience and agree upon common standards. And of course, the issue of funding, and as we used to say, money is the nerve of war. And I have that question for Christian, who is working with the World Bank. And the World Bank works with this government, but there are some reluctances from some donors who are reluctant in transiting the funds to some governments. And we also have the issue of limited resources and which role development or entities should play in this framework where we have more reluctancy of some donors to send cash to the government. I've changed my laptop. I hope you can hear me better now. Yes, we can hear you. So our computers at the World Bank are a bit obsolete. Thank you. So the reluctancy is not universal. Of course, the World Bank works with governments and adaptive social protection system in the Sahel, together in partnership with Germany, France, Denmark, and the United Kingdom, which is based on investment in the national governmental systems. First of all, it's important to use this commitment to strengthen national systems despite the context, despite the challenges at hand. Of course, in case of fragility in various countries of the sub-region. In order to open a way or having a coordinated alternative, it is important to increase coordination of between humanitarian actors and development actors in a governmental coordination framework, even though the funds didn't transit through the national budget. We should get organized with the authorities in a more coordinated approach on data systems, coordinated as well on payment funding systems, and coordinated on an approach where we take advantage of elements of implementation that are tested and also have a dialogue with the objective of having a more coordinated system and more efficient system. The reality today is that in many countries of the region, the states are not able to occupy the whole territory and work over there. So there is an important role in the implementation, which doesn't pass through the government in an operational way, but this could be done in a coordinated way. So I salute the approach that WFP and UNICEF have for their program in the Sahel called Trim Track, where there is a genuine will of moving towards a governmental system where it's possible, and also where there is a possibility of moving separately but in a coordinated way for a direct implementation. I think this is an approach which is not only operational but also in line with that vision of strengthening national systems in order to make them sustainable, and make them grow and strengthen them the more so that they could become mature in view of the various things that are evolving in the regions. Thank you, Christian. On twin track approach, maybe Paul and Sigrid have something to add on. And also with regards to funds that pass through the government, if you have something to say, please feel free. Paul, Paul, please go ahead. Yes, for this approach that Christian has just highlighted, I had also planned to share these experiences with this approach within our joint program with WFP in the Sahel. We call it a double way approach, bi-directional approach. And the objective is to increase the coverage of social protection intervention where national systems lack typically capacities, or in a very structural way, we could strengthen that coverage. Here we are talking about not only coverage for timely response to shocks, but also coverage on routine programs on social protection in order to build resilience. And in the Sahel context, an approach that helps to continue the implementation of existing programs and avoid the interruption of this implementation because of shocks or crises. So in principle, our joint program plans for support to the government in the implementation of cash transfer through national systems, national programs, but where the capacity or access is having a constraint, we will implement through partners, be it partners or United Nations systems, but outside of the national systems. It's also important that in the approach, there are some guiding principles, and be it the way one through the system or way two outside the system, the interventions are coordinated by the government based on the existing uh, coordination mechanism platforms. Uh, And the two responses are in national response plans, national strategy on social protection or social safety nets. And no matter the way, the targeting parameters or the value of the cash transfer are the same everywhere. And finally, very important principle, the implementation should be supported by a mechanism of learning, which allows to learn precisely on the bottlenecks in the implementation with the objective to make this learning profitable to national learning systems, be it targeting system, payment, planning, monitoring of actions, and capitalizing on the experiences obtained in the implementation of cash transfers. I think this approach is an entry gate, among others, in order to have a dialogue regarding the nexus, social protection, and humanitarian action. Thank you very much, Paul. Sigrid, you have the floor. Talking about funding, I would like to add that at the European Union level, this is a very complex issue. As you know, in the Sahel region, we have a mechanism that allows us to move from a budget support to project program approach. And it's difficult to switch. And recently, in the recent years, there were some delegations of the European Union which have decided to move funds to ECHO, and DG ECHO was responsible for using these funds, and these were redirected where there were emergencies in terms of saving lives. So these questions or issues could be handled depending on the countries, depending on the tools, and of course, what is the priority? Do we all agree that in crisis situation, we should save lives first? Yes, we have that commitment because no matter the stakeholder, social protection has various sections. So the various or the lowest level is to save lives. And in the Sahel, we need to focus on this. As for the trim track approach, the double approach, as Paul and Christian said, what is important is that we see here a very strong opportunity for the next step. This is rapid response mechanisms which are being implemented by ECO and other partners. They are using this in this complex uh, contests, be it in Nigeria, north, west, or southwest of Cameroon. We need to find out how to move forward because there is a need, and in the development context, there is a recovery after 3 months. And after 3 months, if there is no cash transfer, no help center, no flexibility, then it will be difficult. I think there is a strong opportunity to tap in. And what is also important is that we should not mix the mandates. ECHO asks us most of the time, why don't you proceed as DG ISPA and finance systems? We have various funding tools, and we'll focus on this at ECHO. Our added value is very strong because we have areas which are difficult to reach. So we need to support each other. And I can see that the World Bank and other donors uh, are very strong in stable areas where there are needs. And the humanitarians, there are talking about the humanitarian sector, there are various crises everywhere. Of course, thank you.
Thank you. We only have 5 minutes, and I think that will be a very great opportunity for each one of you to answer this question. Which is very important for us is to tell us, saying that, okay, we have identified a lot of problems in terms of coordination, in terms of value, convergence, etc. In terms of organization, what are the pathways of collaboration which can be privileged in the coming months to have this collaboration between humanitarian actors and the one supporting social actions and governments to put people in need at the center of it. So I will ask the question to Saba. So what are the different access that we will explore in the coming months? We have a lot of organizations, and it's very difficult to talk on behalf of them. So what we can do is to raise their voices, or to raise the voices of affected population, to have this link, to listen to them, and also to embrace the perspective of this population in need. We will also reach out to all actors in which we have this architecture, humanitarian architecture, to contribute to this dialogue by inventing every time actors of humanitarian support to be part of the dialogue and work at the same time to create this convergence, coherence between different programs. And the limit will be to respect the humanitarian. This link is already there, but for us, it will be to continue working towards this dialogue. Very quickly, Christian. I will talk about the elephant of the room, the reluctance of some countries to go towards cash transfers. Cash transfers, which in a lot of countries, for instance, Burkina has banned the money transfer. All actors, stakeholders here, we want to have this. We want to go towards the implementation. As we know, is one cash transfer is one of the implementation means, and to have a little bit of clarity in the dialogue. Whether we are actors of development, of humanitarian actors, we need to use this tool, and it's very important to demystify it and to be very clear on the impacts. We have impacts is a tool which is efficient, which we have to put at scale, which is very agile and has a lot of benefits, which is not well sometimes appreciated and understood. Around the vision, around this systemic approach, we want to gather everyone to go towards this mission, these common goals, and the implementation. Sigrid, on this question of pathways of a collaboration, future collaborations. I think a lot of the things has been already said. Apart from the advocacy of the importance to have trust conference as the modality, which can be a tool of response of emergencies and also of surveillance, which is very important. We also have this concern of planning of responses and the sharing of tasks. It's already in the sub-region. Now we need to work on the responses towards conflicts. And we think that we need to bring in states and use different macros, the common masters to monitor and assess other tools of other institutions to have an agreement on what we will going to provide as a support, humanitarian support, and to see how we can, what we can do with these little resources that we have. Because in Central Africa and West Africa, they are forgotten. We have other crises which are more important and is affecting both part of the world. And it's very important to agree on this. And another important point is the protection of data, which concerns every one of us, is also a convergence of a team on which we can work. Thank you very much, Ingrid, for reminding us all those points, important points. Paul, to conclude. Thank you very much, Sigrid, for talking about the resources, and I would like to come back on human resources. We have a lot of human resources to implement this dialogue, and I will do my best so that Dr. Sendik, what she said at the beginning of this webinar, to bring this discussion in different countries, is thank you very much for initiating this dialogue at the regional level. We need also to bring in governments and different partners from today. That's the first point. The second point, Dr. Sentik talked about the priority for ECOWAS to strengthen the coordination of the social sector in countries, is an agenda which is very important and we need to adapt to it. It's very critical for the program and also for UNICEF. And one of the pathways is to continue strengthening the coordination and to ensure the leadership of the government and create through that a very strong pathway so that we can have a coordinated action with humanitarian actors. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you very much to all speakers. I will give the floor to Mirko for his conclusion. Thank you very much, Amadou. Thank you, all panelists, for these insightful discussions. I think we have exceeded the time that has been imparted to it, but before leaving, we'd like to share a question with each one of you. Sophie will share the question. Is very similar to the one that we have asked to our panelists. What are the different pathways which will be privileged in the coming month? The dialogue and the cooperation between humanitarian actors and those who support social protection programs, with a view to ensuring effective support for vulnerable individuals in various contexts. You will see that you have two questions, but actually is translated into English. You have the question available in French and in English. We will keep the question there, but I would like to come back on the importance of the linkage. We talked about in this webinar, through the different presentations, the link. This link is very important. And I would like also to say that if you are all here and we are working together, it's because we want to support needy people or people who are facing different shocks, whether it's structural or humanitarian shocks. We need to bear that in mind. And I think is fundamental to have these links or to strengthen them where they are not existing. At a country level, we have also to work on that. I have to mention it if I know that it has been said before. We're going to have other webinars. This will not be the only webinar we will have. We'll have other webinars with Nigeria of Central Sahel. I'm very sorry for the questions we have in the chat box, which are linked to the difficult context of conflicts. Maybe we didn't answer those questions is because they are not in line with the theme we are exploring today, but we'll come back on it. As Paul said, sometimes we have informal links, which helps also formal links. Victorina talked about it in her presentation with facilitators. Sometimes when you know them, that helps to let things move forward very quickly. We need also to work with institutional bodies when we have governments, actors that supports in protection programs, and also the implementation of humanitarian action that can also help us to cover more protection programs. We're going to invite you also for the other webinars. We're going to share them on social media. We are working on the date and the different aspects at CALP. We will also try to contact different countries to see where they are and to see how we can collaborate and strengthen the links. I think we are at the end of this session. I would like to commend all the participants. I would like also to thank the panelists, the presenters, Dr. Sadiq, for ECOWAS, Corina, Celine, for both presentations, and all the panelists, Christian from the World Bank, UNICEF, DGECO, and Saba from Cecilia. Thank you. I would like to also to commend all my colleagues or people working in background for the success of this webinar. I would like also to conclude by saying that all presentations and the recordings will be available with all people who are registered, and we will also share them on social media. I hope this was very interesting, and it's just the beginning of the collaboration. We're going to try to find solutions where there are no solutions and try to improve where we have started something. Thank you all for your attention, and I hope that you have responded to the question that was sent to you. Thank you. Have a good day and see you.